Shop the Sherwin-Williams July Summer Sale and get 30% off paints and stains July 18th through the 28th. With prices starting at $34.29, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store or shop the sale online. Delivery available on qualifying orders. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
It's interesting that children are often very prominent in seeing UFOs or other strange things. Perhaps it's because their minds are open to strange things, whereas an adult would just think, would probably brush off seeing something strange.
I'm talking with Nigel Watson, somebody who's done the homework, boots on the ground, talked to witnesses, decades of research and inquiry, and trying to figure this UFO topic out, and whatever you call them, UFO, aliens, ETs, UAPs, it's something we are still trying to grasp, still trying to figure out how to even define it. So Nigel Watson has been doing this for decades. Could you give me a little bit of your background, just so I'm not, butchering this? Haha.
Right. Well, my new book's called Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited, and it's something that goes back to my original book, Portraits of Alien Encounters. But I originally published myself in 1990, but it's based on things I wrote from the sort of mid-1970s to the sort of mid-1980s. And then I kind of gathered all the information and put it together as a book. So even by 1990, it was what you might call historical cases from the 70s and early 80s. And I just felt I needed to refresh it. And I've spoken to some other people since I wrote the book who have had similar experiences. So I've added some of those to this book, and I've kind of chopped out some surplus chapters to the original book, and I've kind of added something about my own perspective on the subject since writing that book. So it's kind of like upgrade and update and try to put it into a better perspective. I think that's the thing with this subject, though. You're always renewing your ideas and finding out new things about it. I think either from new cases or from new investigators will bring a different perspective to the subject.
You try to keep basically an objective, not to put your own bias into this. And at one point you say in the book, even a UFO researcher, somebody who's trying to be objective, they're have the potential, asking the wrong questions or being with the wrong frame of mind, of leading your witness, leading your percipient, I believe is what you call them. And so that makes it complicated. And do you feel that have you done it justice?
I'm not really sure. I think what I did have is an agenda. I think a lot of people, particularly when I started, had this sort of idea that there were spaceships or something like that. So I think if you come in with an agenda to prove that idea, you kind of overlay it over what people say. And I think that's the thing with this book. I was trying to speak to the people and get all of their story and not just take the UFO bits out of context. I think what you can easily do is pick different cases that support your theory, and then you kind of leave out other important information. So I was trying to put in everything I could about what people told me about their encounters. Because often you'd meet someone who said they'd seen a sort of light in the sky, but when you ask them more questions, you find out they relax a bit and then tell you more about more detailed cases and sightings of that. They might have had other paranormal experiences, or they might feel that they can tell you about a more detailed UFO encounter that's a bit more detailed than just a light in the sky.
You also try to interview people who might have been there at the same time. There are a lot of these witnesses who were children or teenagers when their experience happened. They had friends, and the friends also reported things. And sometimes the friends didn't like what they saw, and the person who saw it wasn't afraid of it.
Yeah, that's true of the case of Paul Bennett. He had a kind of group of school children, all about early teenagers, really. All good friends, but he was a kind of ringleader, and the others sort of went around with him, and a lot of them had, strange sightings of a robot scooping up soil. And another time, he and a friend saw a little man in black, about 3 foot high, crossing the road, and they also heard sort of invisible footsteps and lots of other weird things as well. So I've included as well the case of the Liverpool leprechauns, where gangs of children said they saw leprechauns in parks in Liverpool in the early 60s. It's interesting that children are often very prominent in seeing UFOs or other strange things. Perhaps it's because their minds are open to strange things, whereas an adult would just think, would probably brush off seeing something strange and just say, it was imagination or fantasy or something, or they just don't want to get involved with that sort of thing, whereas children are inquisitive and want to know more about things. I think Paul Bennett in particular is continued to kind of research things like stone circles and megaliths and things like that, and earth energy, and lots of far-out ideas beyond sort of ufology. Yeah, he's quite an impressive person. Even when he was a teenager, he kind of knew his own mind and was very articulate about it as well.
The thing that also comes into this is there's a lot of paranormal activity associated with UFO encounters. And that's the one thing that actually has been a recent observation, or finally acceptance, that it isn't just the light in the sky. Yeah. You're pointing that out with these stories.
Yeah. I think myself and a lot of ufologists in Britain in the early 70s were very inspired by the works of John Keel. He kind of attacked the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and he showed that some alien encounters were more like encounters with ghosts. And he also wrote about men in black encounters, and he showed that a lot of these cases couldn't be of a solid nuts and bolts craft, that they seemed to be able to come and go at will, and seemed to be more like an outcome of paranormal activity. And he developed this idea of ultra-terrestrials, that these aliens seem to be able to go in and out of our spectrum, so that at times they came into the spectrum where we would be able to see and record them, but would be able to move out of this, out of the spectrum, so that we wouldn't be able to observe them. That was quite an exciting idea in the early 70s. It's kind of got changed, and perhaps people aren't as impressed by John Keel's work now, because obviously there's been more research. I think that's the thing, though, that there's a lot of theories that have been advanced, and so in a way some of your research is sort of guided by that.
Oh, I think that's a relevant point. For one thing, people who describe this, the noises or the associated things that they experience, there's one, at least in here, because like a pop, 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 and it's gone. So there's a sound either prior to or as it exits that says it's beginning, it's ending, and then there's no contact or it's silent. And I think that suggests there's more going on that we aren't able to assimilate or assess because we don't know what it is.
Yeah. There's quite an interesting theory about plasma as well, and ball lightning and things like that, where there's a geophysical activity that can cause these plasma balls. And these plasma balls might actually be able to mess with our minds to create a sort of an hallucination of an alien contact, or that these plasma balls might affect our radar systems or cause cars to stop, or radio transmissions to fail. There's quite a thing about car stoppages years ago, but you hardly ever hear of anyone seeing a UFO and having their car break down anymore. And also, we don't seem to get so many close encounters of a third kind now. The sightings are more either related to sort of drones and things like that, and the actual contact with an alien on the ground wearing a spacesuit seems to have gone out of the window.
Yeah, the spacesuit thing is unique. What I've read more of and am more familiar with are contacts that are actually in the house or close, very close by.
Yeah.
It's more, and my suspicion is that maybe that was basically a way of greeting and getting somebody used to, acclimated to this kind of event, and so then gradually you could become more closely. I guess when you had a real close encounter, then you would have some kind of an awareness where it wasn't a total shock and maybe more open to it. I don't know. To me, it seems like it has evolved, and possibly, as you suggest, they've also evolved too. So this isn't just the same. It's you're stepping into the water and everything's changed because the age, the time, and right now there was an article today talking about, I think, what Art Bell referred to a long time ago, the quickening, that the Earth is speeding up, the spin is increasing, and they're actually suggesting changing our time as a result. So that says a lot to me, a lot of things. So many things are changing, and more people are experiencing paranormal things that they're talking about, as opposed to just being quiet and saying, I don't know anything. This is a huge shift, I think, in being able to actually talk about it.
Yes, I think a lot of things have changed, even in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. All this talk about unidentified anomalous phenomena, which brings in the paranormal and ideas about non-terrestrial intelligences and non-human intelligences. And I think, the Earth itself is changing, with climate change alone. And these sort of things perhaps can have an effect on our ideas about what's going out there. And also, perhaps talking about paranormal things in relation to UFOs is a bit more acceptable nowadays than in the past. The kind of people I spoke to years ago didn't really make a big fuss about what they saw, what they experienced. And, when I wrote their stories up, it was mainly for like the Magonia magazine that was published by John Rimmer, and that just had a small circulation really, compared to newspapers and magazines and the big best-selling books. Mm-hmm. So in a way, bringing out my book again gives a chance to refresh people on what was occurring in Britain the early 1970s. And also, when I was researching a lot of this was before Bud Hopkins' abductions became, popular. And there's not much sign of people seeing the spindly greys or anything in the reports I collected. I've got one report of somebody who nearly got transported into a spaceship full of alien women, but it seems more like it was inspired by, fantasy and Star Trek.
That one is interesting. Okay, you're alluding to that one, but that one is, it does have a kind of a showbiz theme. This is the guy who he says that the women paint his nails and they brush his teeth, and I'm like, okay, that is a personal thing, and it's not the usual probing kind of deal. But maybe he didn't mention that. It's just that that one is quite interesting and entertaining.
We it's quite serious about all this, and he said he'd he'd go kind of shopping and looking at women's clothes on behalf of the aliens, and we kind of thought it was kind of more his own fantasy about, women taking an interest in him. And he did get kind of punished by chemicals as well when he slept at night. So he had these kind of fantasies about young female aliens, but he also felt guilty about them and got punished by chemicals in the night. It's sort of relevant that he'd run a chemical company. It's sort of like related to his own psychology and, being whisked away in an invisible car to have a sort of be taken on board a spaceship. It's pretty far out, really. But I felt I didn't want to edit anything out of my book. Like some people would have said, well, it's not the sort of person you want to really interview. We've got to have, proper ufology and not put, what people would call a crank in it or something like that. But I felt I had to include everyone, really, that I came across, because I think that's a problem with ufology. It can blame the authorities for not disclosing things and being sensorial. But ufologists can be just as sensorial themselves and saying, oh, well, why interview children? It's all, their imagination and fantasy, or, or anyone who doesn't sort of experience what's already been published in other books, they won't touch with a barge pole. And I think that's the thing with John Keel. He did open the gates to saying, let's look at UFO witnesses from all viewpoints and explore the subject by not being guided by the spaceship hypothesis.
Well, I like the fact that you include that, because I don't think you can discount. For many people, it's such a personal experience. If it is a plasma entity that has consciousness and is sentient and is able to influence our consciousness, why wouldn't it relate to us in a way that we would understand? And if it's trying to learn, why wouldn't it present itself in a way that was attractive and that would make you want to go back for more and be compliant and curious? So to me, it's just like there was the bait for that particular individual. Yeah. And so whatever, his story doesn't have to match everyone else's, but it should say that there's more ways that they can contact us that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, and another thing is, looking back at my book, is that so many of these people had vivid dreams and nightmares, and often the dreams can be related to UFOs and things. So I think there's kind of like a merging between dreams and what goes on in reality as well. There's a kind of merging that people might have these kind of dreams from childhood onwards. That seems to be a theme, that these events often run from childhood. Sometimes people forget that, and then they have what I call a trigger event. Somebody will see a UFO, they'll suddenly start remembering that they'd seen UFOs before, or their parents had seen UFOs, but nobody spoke about them, or they just discounted them. And then they have a sort of what I call a trigger event, then leads them to perhaps read more about UFOs, contact ufologists, perhaps even write about their own experiences. It can be quite life-changing seeing a UFO. And I suppose in a way, even for a ufologist, it can be life-changing in that, pursuing the subject takes you beyond the limits of normality, really. And I think you've got to be accepting of quite strange experiences people have. And I suppose if you're just looking for an alien spaceship story, anything beyond that is likely to upset you. So I think I've tried to keep an open mind, but like you said earlier, just by interviewing people about UFOs is kind of being an intervention in their life, really, and that, you're going to support their ideas, and then they might I think some people then elaborate on their stories, and the stories can become more complex. I think that happened with Bud Hopkins, where he had a sort of group of contactees and abductees, and I think they all wanted to outshine each other to impress him. So I think, in a way, that wasn't very helpful. It might have helped them come to terms with their experiences, but then I think it's difficult then to have a better outlook on what they're really experiencing if you get too involved.
It can change the person who is the researcher, because you're exposed to information other people don't have access to, and it might change your own view and, the way you determine what is authentic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and also speaking to people with these really high strangeness experiences, where they've had automatic writing or telepathy, or often a lot of people get these visions and intuitions about aliens, to tell them that it's not that unusual. It's quite it's quite common, and that they're not the only ones. When we interviewed people, we didn't really lead them or suggest any books or speak to them, beyond their own case, really. So we didn't say, does this picture of a flying saucer represent what you saw or anything like that, because we didn't want to lead witnesses. So basically we just spoke to them and let them tell their own story. And, that's what I've tried to do with the book, and not to kind of straitjacket into a sort of, a science fiction storyline, or to kind of fit it into a certain theory. At the book of Objects of Alien Encounters, I do mention several different theories, like sleep paralysis, which is a sort of newer theory, but I've not tried to really impose these theories on the material. I think, I want people to use their own judgment, really, about what they think about these cases, and that's helped people in future to relate it to other UFO cases.
Well, you also cover things that are considered Fortean, the pterodactyl flap. How does that relate with the UFO subject?
I'm not sure about that, to be honest. The third echo, did you say?
Okay, the pterodactyl flap. How does that? Because you're going along with the UFO stuff, and then there all of a sudden this giant pterodactyl appears in the middle of the UFO anthologies.
Oh, pterodactyl. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Yes.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, where does that guy come in?
Pterodactyl. Paul Bennett was involved in investigating some of them, and people in Yorkshire near Bradford saw these pterodactyls, and were sometimes related to UFOs, but were kind of really large prehistoric creatures flying in the sky. The intriguing thing about that is these sort of creatures were also portrayed in a science fiction book about a boy who has UFO encounters. It's a book by Ian Watson called Miracle Visitors. So Ian Watson, the science fiction writer, was kind of writing about a boy who has UFO experiences on the Yorkshire moors, roughly in the time frame that I was interviewing Paul Bennett about his real UFO encounters in Yorkshire. So it's a bit of a synchronicity, really, and having pterodactyls of all things flying around is pretty unusual, although similar sightings have occurred in the United States as well. But you could also link it to, Mothman as well, unusual flying creatures, really. Mm-hmm. So you can't get anything more out of our own time framed in a pterodactyl, can you?
Yeah, that pretty much says, okay, billboard. This all right. I think Paula is the one you interviewed. I'm thinking that's the one I remember who talked about the abduction experience, but she also talks about not relying on the government to come forward and be the judge on whether this is real or not, because this seems to be more than something that the government is addressing. And so for people who are waiting for disclosure, and somehow it's already there are so many thousands of stories worldwide that it's really at this time difficult to deny the presence of UFOs of some sort influencing our reality. That was the one case I saw that was, I thought, had more of an everyday current assessment of what we're experiencing now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that we don't need governments to disclose what, thousands of people already know. And I think the disclosure program in America is trying to do it through government channels and set up meetings and all this sort of thing. But we're only sort of addressing a small part of the UFO phenomenon. They're trying to sort of prize out of the government information about aliens recovered from crash sources that are in Area 51. But, you just have to look at my book or any other UFO book. These cases are worldwide and they've occurred, decades ago. And the things that are, elude the American authorities, really. Yeah. Because people are having these experiences everywhere. So, in a way, I don't think any government really knows what's going on. I think some governments don't really care. I think certain people in governments do take a great interest in the subject, but there's not enough momentum to really study it. And also, how would you persuade a government to study the kind of way out cases that are in my book? They're more likely to look at things that are more, technological things like these UAPs that, the government can look at, because it can say, well, there might be, foreign assets spying on the United States. So, it has got a sort of thing that they can say is worthy of study because it could protect the US government. But I think if you look at UFO cases, the sheer number of them, I don't think anyone can really control them or stop them. I think it's one of these things that people will always have UFO sightings and experiences. I don't think anybody's going to really solve the subject because there's so many aspects to it.
Have you noticed a surge, like when we have more trauma going on, wars and such, that is there an increase in the sightings? Is there a shift, a change? Have you noticed that?
I did another book called UFOs of the First World War, where I described several sightings of phantom airships before the First World War. And these were like social panics that occurred throughout the world. Two of them were in Britain in 1909 and 1913. People in Britain saw these phantom airships, and people believed they were German Zeppelins coming over to spy out the country, in preparation for invasion. In both instances, people mainly saw lights in the sky, or what they described as searchlights. And in the 1909 scare, there's actually a Punch and Judy man who saw what he thought were sort of Germans jumping into the basket of a balloon and flying away, showing two electric lights on him as the float flew away. So in a way, that's been described as an early close encounter of a third kind, because it couldn't possibly have been, Germans in South Wales at that time flying about in balloons. And scares like that were very much like war scares, because the new technology of Zeppelins threatened Britain, because in Britain we had the biggest navy in the world, and the navy was seen as a means of protecting Britain against invasion. And obviously Zeppelins would have meant that we were very much open to, a German invasion, and people were very fearful of it. You could say these sightings were of warners, really. And it's interesting, with the current phase of UAPs, people in America and other countries are frightened of all these UFOs, because I think there could be foreign drones, meaning that they can sort of attack us and invade us without impunity.
There was a drone flap recently that seems to have quieted down, and a lot of media attention. For a brief period, that was headline news, and then it disappeared. Yeah. It was like, that was it. Okay. But people are still saying they see drones. It just became a non-issue.
Well, it was like the case of the Chinese balloon that was shot down, and that sort of died away. But that was amazing, because even in Britain it was reported as a UFO shot down by an American fighter jet. And it's almost like something out of one of these sort of 1950s, flying saucer movies, but it was actually on the news, because in Britain we don't usually get much UFO reportage on the main channels. So it's interesting that these sort of panics occur because of new technology, and people start looking at the sky and then interpret what they see in terms of what they're most frightened of. So the British were seeing, German Zeppelins back before the First World War. And in America there was a similar airship scare, but that centred on the idea that a secret inventor had created one, new marvellous aircraft. So in a way, often things seen in the sky are interpreted by our own expectations and what's going on around us.
I like Chapter 5, and this is Josephine Elisa's Sightings in Hull. And that's a fascinating story, too. Yeah.
She was more, I suppose she was quite a creative person and intuitive. So most of her things came to her when she meditated. And she has quite an optimistic view of the world as well. And so it's quite a positive message. And also it's interesting, the aliens she drew for us always sort of radiated light, which reminds me of the sort of latest cases of people seeing, light beings, that sort of look originally like aliens, and then they see that they're just glowing with light, and that perhaps they're just interpreting it as an alien because, that's the current expectation. But people talk about light beings, and she seems to have been a bit ahead of the curve in that sense. I think she's quite an interesting person. I think a lot of what she received was through automatic writing, which is something that not all ufologists approve of, really.
At the same time, though, she's very concise, and her information seems to be very well presented.
Yeah, and she's another one who had an early UFO site, and she started to write about these things about 10 years after she'd seen a sort of flying saucer in France. So the groundwork had already been laid, really, and that's another aspect that we spoke about earlier, that people have perhaps childhood encounters or encounters that they didn't really take much notice of. And then there's some sort of trigger event that recollects their experience. And so she sort of experienced that as well.
Well, she had actually like a person that she saw. In 1974, she was she didn't remember it until she started writing. And then she remembered seeing a person, a man, 6 foot tall or so. And they had, it wasn't like they had a conversation, but it was like, that to me was the trigger moment for her to remember, for her to start doing what she was doing. It was like, okay, now it's time.
Yeah, and he was a sort of out of place person. He was tall. He seemed to know who she was, and he kind of walked with long strides and was wearing boots on a hot sunny day. So she seemed quite puzzled by that. And that sounds like something out of John Peel's case books, where he mentions men in black that seem to act in a really odd fashion and don't seem to be aware of social behaviour or don't even seem to be able to work their own bodies properly, you know.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. That sort of was one of the things that she remembered.
You're mentioning Men in Black, and let me tell you that I've noticed that the theme, the dreams, you know, the contact. The people have UFO dreams. They have other things that remind them of what's going on or what might be going on, whether it's a premonition or an indication of something that is happening during their lifetime. I had a dream, and I was out in the middle of a field. I'll just do this, a real short version of it. A black vehicle, long like a limo, long black car, drives up. 3 guys get out. They are dressed in black suits. I don't see their faces. I'm not aware of that, except that they're wearing hats, they're in suits, and one says to me, "We need you to start doing what you agreed to do when you came here." And somehow I knew what that meant. I wake up knowing that I had the dream, and I could see people further away from me, a guy in a group, and I wasn't really with them, but I was alone as these guys approached, and nobody seemed to pay any attention, except then they got back in the car and left. But it was a distinct message. We need you to start doing what you agreed to do when you came here. And I knew I had to change my life. Okay, so that was a dream with Men in Black. I didn't believe in Men in Black. So I was approached in a way I might get the point, I guess, you know. But so these things can happen, and they can change your life. And it is, you know, that's one of those things like, oh my gosh, that's a Men in Black moment. And so the dreams, you know, those are part of it.
Yeah, it's sort of classic that there's 3 of them in a sort of black limo. And also, it's interesting that in a lot of cases I've looked at, the facial features are usually indistinct. Like Paul Bennett was sort of a strange robot. It had no facial features, and I think several of the other people I mentioned in the book don't have very specific facial features. I think Josephina Luther, who met the man in France, her aliens don't really have any facial features in her drawings. You know, it's almost like they're a blank canvas. Another thing with your dream is that they say something significant, and often aliens say rather odd things that strike a chord with people. It's almost like they've got some like trigger words that sort of makes you want to do something in response. And, you know, that's obviously what happened to you, that they triggered something in your mind.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
To do something.
It felt like a timeline. I had to change something immediately. I knew what it was when I woke up. There was no language to put or an explanation. It's just I knew, okay, this is what I have to do. And so things changed.
Yeah.
But I was like, whoa. You know, he says, so there are ways that we get information that may be this kind of contact without having a UFO sighting. Now, you know, that I have had that in my bedroom, a little UFO, but it isn't something that is a conscious awareness of this thing is controlling me, but I do understand how people can be influenced. And it, you know, once you've had this happen, then you're more curious about, well, what is everybody else going through? You know, if this happened to me, what happened to others? Yeah. And so I like the variety of stories that you've included, because it gives you an idea. This is so much broader than just a UFO or an ET or an abduction. It's just like, there's more to this.
Yeah. I think the good point about these portraits of alien encounters is that these are all in Britain over, a few decades, and it parallels with a lot of cases in the United States and probably other countries as well. So this is a worldwide phenomenon, and I think that's the exciting thing about it, that there's so many people having these experiences, and that they tap into all sorts of aspects of human experience, really. And I think, like with you talking about intuition and dreams, it's something the more scientific ufologists would chop out of their equation, really. Whereas I think, we've got to look at all aspects of this subject.
Well, I think the consciousness element is universal. So if it's figuring out a way to get to us, consciousness, we are conscious asleep and awake. All right. So there's the thread. If you experience something in a dream, actually, I heard Joe McMongill talking about this when he was trying to do, I think it was either remote viewing. He went into a loop where he was basically lucid dreaming, and he went into a loop, and so he's trying to get himself out. And he said each time he tried, it was difficult. And one time they told him, well, the best way, just bite your arm, because when you bleed, it'll wake you up. And so he remembered that in the dream. He bit his arm, and it was bleeding, so I'm awake. And he says, no, I was still in it. And it didn't work. So that's, that's how our consciousness works with us. And so if we believe these things to be real, then our body, our mind, we interpret it as a real event. And that's where it gets interesting, because how can you tell when he's talking about knowing, and he's very practiced at doing that and still getting caught in the loop? That suggests, again, that consciousness is the key, that something is happening that knows how to shift, influence, and, whether it's training us, like some of your encounters have mentioned, talking about we have to be prepared. And so this is a way of training and engaging you. It's just fascinating. I just think there's so much more to it, that we're just somehow now beginning to put a few more dots on the I's and crosses on the T's. Oh, speaking of that, there's an angel in here that there's a very unique.
Oh,
yeah. Let's hear about that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's quite a few angel sightings actually. Paul Bennett saw. He was messing about with a torch in his bedroom with his brother and trying to scare him, and then they kind of saw a sort of angel image on their bedroom wall, and they called it Sigma, the angel. And I think they saw it on one or two occasions, and they'd stay up all night to try and see, whether it was a strange reflection on the ceiling or anything like that. I don't know, but the telling thing is that Paul said he was really curious about it, whereas he and his friend wanted to run away and were scared of it. And that just shows Paul Bennett's, curiosity, and is willing to look at things that other people want to run away from. And, it might have been just, like I say, you could explain it as perhaps reflections, and they were just winding each other up or anything. But then there's another case in the book about Norman Harrison, and he also came, he had some mental contacts with angelic beings, and there's a sort of running theme here that quite a few people have had these UFO experiences also of seeing kind of angel-like beings. I suppose in the context of UFOs, an angel would be regarded as an alien, whereas in sort of a more religious-minded person, it would be an angel. And, there's that kind of crossover. I've kind of written an article for Fortean Times that should come out, I think, in September, that looks at the angel events in this book. Yeah, that's something I didn't really expect when I first started researching UFO cases. I didn't think I'd ever come across sightings of angels and archangels. It's interesting also that one of the people in the book mentions the Archangel Michael. And I've read 2 or 3 books now that all mention that Archangel in the context of UFOs, and they couldn't have, the person who mentions this couldn't have been contaminated by these other sources because they're all after his experiences. Also, in my own life, I came across quite a few coincidences involving the St. Michael. I got a letter out of the blue from somebody who said they saw a UFO over St. Michael's Church, and there's 1 or 2 other St. Michael related coincidences. And I think some other researchers have also come across this thing that once you get involved with UFOs, you start coming across coincidences and synchronicities. And so you can get kind of drawn into this rabbit hole of speaking to different people and realizing that even though these people are in contact with each other, there's running threads through all these stories that are quite intriguing.
Absolutely. Yeah, the angel, there's a drawing of the angel in the spacesuit that you've included, but it also has the alien face.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Even one of Josephine Elisa's drawings of a saucer dream, the alien looks quite angelic because it has rays of light coming from it. And Norman Harrison's, it's quite a dark character, really, but even he saw these sort of beings that were there as a kind of protection as well. Saw it more in terms of a crusader type figure, and had Alpha and Omega symbols. So it's sort of the beginning and end of things.
That's what I wondered about the symbols. Yeah, they're very distinct, and you can't miss it.
And yet the face inside it almost looks like a large eye grey, doesn't it? It's sort of like large black eyes beneath the helmet. So it's a kind of fusion of the two, which is quite spooky because he kind of drew this quite a long time ago, long before the greys become a kind of popular thing.
Well, what's interesting, some people see them, some people don't. And one of the stories that I thought was interesting that also involves an angel, Ray Hernandez. He's with, he started a group with the Experiencers, and he was working with Edgar Mitchell. They had a huge survey of experiencers asking for their accounts and stuff. But what triggered him was in his own home, he had an experience, and I don't remember what woke them up, but his wife, the dog, was ill. And she was desperate for help. And so somehow he's going downstairs. There's a disturbance in the living room. She's there with the dog. He blanks. He's asleep. He's gone. She's with the dog. And when he revives, she tells him that angels took her dog and healed the dog. And in that same time, they saw this massive, massive UFO over the house. So even though he didn't see the angels, because these are aliens. My wife, I don't know what she saw. She's just, that's her. And so, but at the same, so it's the two of them have their own experience, and he will not ever go with that was an angel. It was an alien, and she's going, it's an angel. It's not an. It's not an alien. But that's the thing. They each had that experience in the same house, the same time. They both saw the UFO, so that's good. They agree on that. But all right. So, but the dog was healed, and so these kinds. And one of the stories in your book involves, I think it was Paul who felt that he had been healed after he thought he was going to die, and he had an accident. Yeah, and he said he says they had to have healed him because his recovery was unusual, and that. So I'll just stop there. But yeah, the angels are here.
Premonition. Yeah, it's not just, also other ufologists have come across this sort of thing as well, that people regard aliens as being regarded as sort of like, guardians have performed in the same way as an angel would, really. Like you say, perhaps it's in terms of how people perceive things, and like today we're more likely to look at a strange entity as an alien rather than as an angel, or a Mary or anything like that. Yeah, it's interesting that Jacques Vallée mentions the Fatima visions. He puts them in the context of a UFO encounter, and so rather than seeing the Virgin Mary, they might have seen aliens of some type.
That's what's so, I think, illuminating about these stories, because you give a background and the time, the era, and they're still happening, and they're still perplexing, and there's still not one size fits all answer. So, where do we go? Where do we go from here? Uh-huh.
Well, I think that's what makes the subject interesting, that there's so many strands to follow, and I'm kind of open-minded. I'm kind of open-minded, but I'm also kind of skeptic and rational at times as well. So I don't know. Sometimes you think, is it fantasy and imagination? But then there's too much going on for it or to be sort of brushed away like that. And I think it's the fact that people are having all sorts of different experiences and encounters means that perhaps there isn't just one explanation for them. It can be, like I said earlier, about plasma balls and geophysical activity perhaps influencing people, or it could be some great intelligence from beyond. It's something I think we're all going to be discussing probably in 100 years' time, and that's what's interesting to me.
Well, and there are some places where there are a higher, at least reported, incidence of strange events. And there are places that are known as hotspots, whether it's paranormal or UFO or whatever. They are more likely to have some kind of a weird thing mentioned when somebody's visited, said, oh yeah, this happened to me. And that's what they're known for. So that says that our reality, I think, is a lot larger than what we have agreed to with our consensus reality. Okay, yeah, I see, like the couple who had different experiences. One is experiencing an angel, and the other one, she has proof that she experienced her angel because the dog was healed. So something happened. Now, he has his own idea that these are aliens because that's the way UFOs work. They don't have angels. They have aliens. It's ET. So that is our own evolution of, we are learning and growing and expanding. And with these stories, it helps to give us a context of the other people who've had these experiences and where did they go with it? What did they learn? And I think the word is discern. You try to use discernment before you project your own beliefs or some other external idea on the people that you're talking to. And I think that I ask you whether you've done you've done the job, credit, give it, and I think you have. I like the way you've tried to be objective and tried to say, here, these are the facts. Now make up your mind. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that's all you can do, really, to be honest about it. And I think just as perhaps seeing an angel or an astronaut reflects the fashion of what people expect to see, I suppose it's the same with theories. So if I was to just brand all this with one theory, it would probably be out of date next year. I think that's something that somebody says, as soon as you get a theory to explain UFOs, something that will happen that will undermine it. So I think that's the thing. It's a very elusive subject.
Okay, so have you changed? Since you've been doing this investigation and research since the 70s, how has it changed you?
I think it's just made me more open-minded about things. And that, it's kind of taken me on a journey, really, because I helped set up a UFO group back in the 70s, and through that I met a lot of different people, and then writing for UFO magazines and things like Magonia, I came into contact with, a more skeptical approach to the subject. Often it was guided by what John Keel had written, but we kind of followed a different path from what Keel did, really. But it sort of led me to study psychology and get a degree in the subject, and it made me move on to other things, really. So even though I've not really seen a UFO, just being interested in the subject has put me into contact with lots of people and probably changed my life from just living in a small town to moving to London, and I think it's very hard to know how you've changed, but I think the subject still intrigues me, and it's something that's evolving with all these latest revelations about UAPs and different things.
What do you suggest for somebody who's just trying now to get into this research and figure out which way is up? Because it can get confusing very quickly. Who do you think is a good resource? I mean, aside from your books, all right, we'll go there. So, where do you go for the legit stuff?
Oh, that's a tricky. Well, I think Jacques Vallée's books are very readable. I don't think it's a fairly recent one, but his books are quite easy to read, or even John Keel's, because they are kind of accessible books that tell you more than spaceships and things like that. Jenny Randall's wrote lots of books, but a lot of them have gone out of print now. So it's more something that's online, really, and books aren't as prominent, really. I think another thing is to read some of the books by the abduction researchers, because that seems to be a subject area that's kind of got neglected in recent years. Books by Bud Hopkins are worth reading, even if you might take them with a pinch of salt.
I think with any of it, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because, even though we try to do our best to remember things, I know when I retell a story, I might forget, oh my gosh, this happened too, and that was important. But I totally forgot about it because, I was telling the story and got distracted. So our stories change, and our perceptions and the things that we believe about the stories also change. When I started doing certain things, I remember at the very beginning, I didn't have the vocabulary or the depth to even understand some of the things that were happening. And then I changed and it evolved. So a lot of this, I think, is helpful to have the history and have individual encounters and, go with your gut. If you're drawn to something, that's what a lot of these people, the people that you have identified, they all have a similar thing of somehow knowing or being influenced or having a sense or, there's something there that says this is important and they pay attention to it.
Yeah. Well, what I've done with the book, I've supplied links to archives and magazines that help you find out more about British UFO cases. And I've done a bibliography that includes the most relevant books about British UFO cases, because I thought it'd be too much to sort of write a full history of British ufology, because it's kind of it would have to be encyclopedic, really, and I'd probably miss out a few things. It'd be quite a big project. There's somebody called John Hanson who's actually collected together loads of British cases and put them in volumes of books. And I've done a bibliography that has most of the major books about British UFO cases that have been published from the beginning, really, and a few other recommended books, like John Keel's Operation Trojan Horse. It's quite interesting that quite a few people now are writing books that tell you about their lifetime encounters rather than just a one-off encounter. And it's quite good with things like Amazon and self-publishing and small publishers now, that people are getting their stories out. Whereas I suppose with mainstream publishers, they're more likely to edit books to make them sound more like fictional, exciting stories. And I think it's good that people now have got access to the internet and self-publishing, where they can relate their own stories without being sort of censored by, publishers who want a more mainstream audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, at the end of the book, you have some wonderful references. For more information, if you're interested, then there's a great compilation there.
Yeah, I wanted that because I thought, if people are inspired by the things I've written about, it'd be good to look at other cases in relation to them. And, so it is a kind of like a handy guide to British ufology in general, yeah.
Well, I thank you for your time. I really enjoyed the book. I like the stories. I like the variety and the fact that, you're trying to be objective, even though I can tell that you're also trying to be a little bit skeptical and say, okay, this is what I researched. Doesn't mean I buy into it. It means I've done the work. I've done the math. And this person is, as far as you could tell, had a really good story to present.
Yeah, I think that's the best I could do, really. And that, I think all of these people are very genuine, and I'm pleased they're able to share the story with me and to let me, write about them. And I'm glad you got something from the book as well.
So you're also on Facebook, and the book is available at Amazon or your favorite bookseller.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that's everything, really.
It's Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited, with the fact that the Earth is spinning faster and time might be also spinning a little faster. The clocks might need readjusted, and maybe more of our reality is going to be far more interesting as things get speedy. Maybe we'll speed up too and get a clue faster. It won't take us quite so long. So thank you.
That seems to be a theme that these events often run from childhood. Sometimes people forget that, and then they have what I call a trigger event. Somebody will see a UFO, they'll suddenly start remembering that they'd seen UFOs before, or their parents had seen UFOs, but nobody spoke about them, or they just discounted them. And then they have a sort of what I call a trigger event. It then leads them to perhaps read more about UFOs, contact ufologists,